Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, in this video today, we are going to build an application that uses the Room database on Android. Okay, so we will see how we can create a simple SQL database and perform some operations on it. So things like inserts, retrieval of data, deletion, and so on. Okay. Now, before we get started, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel to help me build this channel and reach a larger audience. And make sure you stick around till the end of the video where I tell you where you can find more information about the topics that we're discussing. All right, so let's get started. So in Android Studio, go ahead and create a new Android Studio project. We're going to click Next. You're going to give it a name, whatever you like. I'm going to simply call it Room Database Example. Okay, and click Finish. Okay, so that's it. We're going to wait for the project to be built. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to add the library dependencies that Room requires. Okay, so these are quite simple to add. So let's open up our build.gradle file. We simply hit double shift and type build.gradle. Make sure you open the app file here. Okay, and down below where it says dependencies, we're going to add some dependencies here. So first of all, actually at the top, we need to add the annotation processor for Kotlin. So we're going to say apply plugin, and that's going to be Kotlin-KAPT, so the annotation processor. And down below in the dependencies, we're going to say implementation Android X dot room colon room dash runtime colon 2.2.5. Now the version here might evolve, but the topics that we're covering in this video are quite basic, so you can use your latest version, or you can stick with a 2.2.5 version that I have here. Okay, so we're going to use the KAPT, so the annotation processor, and here we're going to say Android X dot room colon room dash compile compiler with an R colon 2.2.5. Okay, so these are the libraries that we need. We're going to sync now. Now make sure you get no errors here. If you've got an error, then you made a mistake while typing this, so go back and check that as well. All right, so we have a few things that we need to implement. So Room database has three main components. Okay, so it has an entity, which is the object in code that will translate to a table in the database. It has a DAO, or data access object, which is the functionality, the interface through which we can communicate with a database, and it has the database itself. So we're going to go ahead and create these three entities. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to create a new package here. Okay, I'm just going to call it DB. You can pretty much name it anything you like. I just want to put everything related to my Room database inside here. So I'm going to create a new file, and this is going to be a class, and I'm going to call this user. Okay, so we're going to have some users that we want to put in our database. Okay, this is going to be a data class. Okay, now importantly here, we need to add the annotation entity. Okay, the entity annotation. All right, so here we're going to have a few pieces of data in this data class. So we're going to say val name of type string. Now, if we want this information to be passed in the database, we need to pass an annotation called column info, and we need to give it the name and the name that we want for this data to have in the database. So I'm going to call this first underscore name. Okay, let me, so that should be fine. Okay, so next up, I forgot the quotes here. Okay, so next up we have column info, and I'm going to have a name equals, let's say, last name, and I'm going to have the variable last name in camel case as a string. So let's add a couple more. Let's say we have a column info. Let's say name is going to be age, and then val age is going to be an integer, and then a column info name that's going to be, let's call this, maybe we can say if the user is employed or not. So employed. Okay, val, let's call this working to show the difference between the variables, the variable names, working as a Boolean. Okay, so that's enough. I just want to cover a few different types so that you can see how they are passed in the database. Now, importantly here, inside the database, we want our user to have a ID. Okay, so the ID needs to be incremented automatically by the database. So in order to do that, we're not going to add the ID here, okay, because we want to be able to create the user ourselves and not pass an ID, but we want the ID anyway inside the database. So inside the body of the class, we're going to say at primary key, okay, and here we have auto generate equals true. Okay, so that will be generated automatically. And this is going to be a var. Make sure this is var, not val as we had here. So var UID is of type int question mark equals no. Okay, so we're going to leave it at that. This will allow us to put users in the database and have them have a unique ID in that table, okay, in the table with the same name. Okay, so that's it for the user. Now we need to create another new Kotlin file, this time an interface, and that's going to be the user DAO. So the user DAO here is going to be an @DAO. @DAO simply means it's a data access object, okay? And this is the interface where we tell the system how we want to interact with the data, with the information. So here we're going to have a query. Okay, select star from user. Okay, and this is going to be attached to a function called getAllUsers, and that will return us a list of user. All right, so that looks pretty good. That allows us to retrieve all the information, but of course, we want to be able to insert information as well. So we're going to have an insert attached to a function called, let's say, insert. And here, we can insert as many users as we want. So we can say var arg user of type user. Okay, so that's the insertion. Now, we also want to be able to delete a user. Okay, fun insert, delete. And here we pass the user that we want to delete. Okay, so that is all for now for the user DAO. And in order to connect these two, we need another class here. And that's going to be a database. Okay, so I'm going to call this user database. Now, for me, I only have one table in my database, so I'm going to call it user database. You can, of course, call it your app name database or whatever makes sense to you. Okay, so this is going to be an abstract class. We're going to annotate it with a database. And here, importantly, we need to provide the entities that are stored in this database. And here we have a list of user : class. Okay, and we have a version equals 1. The version here allows us to make upgrades later on in the database. This is a kind of an advanced topic which we're not going to cover right now. So the user database extends from room database. Okay, and the implementation is quite simple. We're going to have an abstract fun get, or rather user DAO, that will return us a user DAO. Okay, user DAO. So basically, when we call this database, we retrieve the DAO and we can perform the operations that we define here. Okay, so let's go ahead and try that out. Let's see how that would work in practice. So inside my main activity here, I'm going to first retrieve the database. Okay, let me define a database here. So val, or var rather, db, or I'm going to make this a late init var db, and that is going to be of type user database. Okay, so late init because we're going to initiate it here. So DB is going to be room.database builder. And here we need to provide the application context, the class, so that's going to be for us the user database, class.java, and the database name that we want, so database name. Or you can give it user database, whatever you like here. And I'm going to say .build. Okay, let me just arrange this, format this nicely. Okay, so we have our database is created like that. Okay, so we have our database. Let's go ahead and create the users that we want to put in our database. So I'm going to say val user1 is going to be a user. Let's give it a name. I'm going to call this James, a last name, Bond. Let's give him an age, 35, and whether or not he's employed, well, he works for Her Majesty's Secret Service, so he is employed. Then let's duplicate this twice, and I'm going to say user2 is going to be Alice. And Smith, let's say she is 28, and true. And finally, we have user3, which is going to be Michael. And I can't think of a last name, M dot, and the age is going to be 25. And we're going to have false for the employment. OK, so that is what we have here. So let's go ahead and add or insert a user to our database. So we can simply say db.userdao.insert user1. So that kind of makes sense, right? You should be able to insert the user straight away. But if we run this code as it is right now, we will get an error. OK, so I want to show you exactly the error that we get, and we will see then what the problem is after that and how we can solve it. OK, did you catch that? The application just started and it crashed. So let's have a look in the logcat. We should get an error here somewhere. That's really too verbose. Let me go to the run, and there we can see illegal state exception, cannot access database on the main thread. So this kind of makes sense as well, right? So you cannot access a database on the main thread for fear that it will take too long and it will crash your application. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to put every access to our database on a background thread. Okay, very, very important. Every time you access a database, you need to do it on a background thread so that you don't stop the actual main thread of the application. Now, there are a few different ways to do this. For me personally, I find the easiest one is to use coroutines. Okay, so we're going to use coroutines in this project. So first of all, we need to add the coroutines to our build.gradle file. So double shift, open up the build.gradle file, and here down below somewhere, we're going to say implementation org.jetbrains.kotlinx kotlinx coroutines core 1.3.0. Now, of course, you don't need to remember this by heart. You can always find it online. So I've added the core. I also need to add the Android instead of core, right? So kotlinx coroutines Android. That should be fine. Let's sync. If there's any errors, it means we typed something wrong here. If not, then it should be fine. It looks like it is fine for me. OK, so how do we use coroutines here? Well, it's quite simple, really. We have a global scope. OK, there we go. We have it available .launch. So we're launching the coroutine. OK, right. So we have the functionality inside of our coroutine. Now, what I also want to do here, we're going to run this, and it's going to go into the database, but we're not going to see anything. OK, so I want to create down below here a function. Let's call it private fun display users. Okay, so here we're going to retrieve the users from our database and display them on the screen. So val users is going to be db.userdao.getAllUsers. Now, importantly, this will work because we always call this function from a coroutine. Okay, so this needs to be a suspend function. Okay, so how do we display this on the screen? Well, we have our main activity. Here, let's give it a ID display, okay, so that we can have a handle on it. Okay, so down below here we have all our users. So we have var display text is going to be an empty text for user in users. Then we have display text plus equals. Here we have username name space user dot last name space dash space and user age. You can of course make this text anything you like. Make sure you put a /n at the end. Okay, so that's my display text, and all that's left for me to do is say display from main activity dot text is going to be display text. Okay, so we're printing out this text. Okay, so here where we create the user, I'm going to say display users. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and run it. And if everything works well, we should be able to see a user here. All right, there we go. So we have our user James Bond. Now, of course, we only insert one user, but we can insert the second and third one as well. Now here we will see something interesting. If I run this now, we will actually find 4 users in the database because, of course, we already ran our code once. So James Bond is already there, but we are adding James Bond again as user 1 here. Okay, so we will see James Bond twice. Okay, there we go. So we see James Bond twice. So of course, if we run this again, we will see 3 more users in the list. So the thing that we need to do now is before we insert any users, we need to delete whatever is there. We need to delete all the information from the database. So we already know how we can delete a specific user. However, what I want here is to have a fun delete all. Okay, something like that. So how do we achieve this? Well, we simply have a query. Delete from user. Okay, so that will simply delete everything. And if we call this function db.userdao.deleteAll, before then we will only have the 3 users we inserted every time we run the code. Okay, so let's try that out. And this time we should see 3 users in our database. Okay, there we go. So we have our 3 users. All right, guys, so that's it for the room database. You can see it's quite simple, actually. We only have to implement 3 components. And you can play around with these and have a bit of fun. You can have pretty much any query you like. You can add it or call it like this in the database. Now, I've covered just the kind of tip of the iceberg here. Now, if you want more information, I have a few complete courses on some of these topics. So for one, the room database is part of a larger course on Android Jetpack, which I have linked below, which will teach you not only room, but also how room interacts with other components of Android Jetpack, right? So things like MVVM architecture, navigation, and so on and so forth, right? So check that out. And also, I have linked below a course on coroutines if you want to find out more information about that. There's a lot to be said about coroutines, and I've put it all in a course of about 10 hours where we have not only theory, but examples and practical applications and a whole lot more. Okay, so make sure to check those out. Like I said, guys, please give a like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.